We moved to Willowbrook Gardens for peace after my husband's final Navy SEAL deployment. But our fresh start shattered when an HOA president's cruelty turned violent. She nearly killed our 10-year-old son with a concrete pillar and staged it as an accident. She thought no one would uncover the truth, but she didn't know his father was trained to hunt monsters. I'm Sarah Thompson, and this is how a neighborhood bully learned exactly who she was dealing with. But before I show you how Jake destroyed her, let me take you back to when we thought we'd found paradise.
My name is Sarah Thompson, and I thought moving to Willowbrook Gardens would be the fresh start my family desperately needed. My husband, Jake, had just returned from his final deployment as a Navy SEAL, and we were ready to settle down somewhere peaceful where our 10-year-old son, Alex, could grow up safely. Jake had served 3 tours overseas, and the transition back to civilian life hadn't been easy for him. The quiet suburban neighborhood seemed like the perfect place for him to decompress and for our family to heal from the years of separation and stress that military life had brought us. Alex was excited about the move, too. He was a bright, energetic boy who loved soccer, video games, and building things with his hands. The new house had a big backyard where he could play, and the neighborhood had several other families with children his age. "Mom, can I go explore the neighborhood?" Alex asked on our second day in the house, his eyes bright with excitement. "Stay close to home," I told him, "and remember to be polite to any neighbors you meet." Alex nodded eagerly and ran outside, his soccer ball tucked under his arm. Watching him through the window, I felt hopeful about our new life. Jake was in the garage unpacking his tools, and for the first time in years, our family felt normal and complete. But that feeling of peace wouldn't last long. About an hour after Alex had gone outside, I heard shouting coming from the street. I looked out the window and saw my son standing on the sidewalk, facing a tall, imposing woman with perfectly styled gray hair and an expensive-looking outfit. Even from a distance, I could see that the woman was angry. She was pointing at Alex and gesturing aggressively, while my son stood there looking confused and intimidated. I quickly went outside to see what was happening. "Is there a problem here?" I asked, walking up to them.
The woman turned to me with a look of pure disdain. "Are you this child's mother?" "Yes, I'm Sarah Thompson. This is my son, Alex. We just moved in 2 days ago." "Well, Mrs. Thompson, your son has already managed to violate multiple community standards," the woman said coldly. "I'm Patricia Whitman, president of the Willowbrook Gardens Homeowners Association, and I will not tolerate this kind of behavior in my neighborhood." I looked at Alex, who was holding his soccer ball and looking like he was about to cry. "What behavior? What did he do?" "He was playing soccer on the community lawn without permission," Mrs. Whitman said, her voice dripping with condescension. "The HOA rules clearly state that recreational activities on common areas require prior approval from the board." I glanced at the patch of grass where Alex had apparently been kicking his ball around. It was a small area between the sidewalk and the street, hardly what I would call a community lawn.
"I'm sorry. We didn't know about that rule," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Alex apologized to Mrs. Whitman. "I'm sorry," Alex said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. But Mrs. Whitman wasn't satisfied. "Sorry isn't enough. There's a $50 fine for unauthorized use of common areas, plus a $25 administrative fee. You'll receive a bill in the mail." I stared at her in disbelief. "You're fining us $75 because my 10-year-old kicked a soccer ball on the grass?" "Rules are rules, Mrs. Thompson. If we make exceptions for one family, where does it end?" Mrs. Whitman's smile was cold and calculating. "I trust this won't happen again." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Alex and me standing on the sidewalk in shock. "Mom, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to play there," Alex said, tears starting to form in his eyes. "I was just kicking the ball around."
"It's okay, sweetheart," I said, putting my arm around him. "You didn't do anything wrong. That lady is just particular about rules." But as we walked back to the house, I had a sinking feeling that this was just the beginning of our problems with Patricia Whitman. Within weeks, Patricia Whitman fined us for breathing wrong, $75 for Alex kicking a soccer ball on her grass, $100 for trash cans out 15 minutes early, even $250 for a garden gnome she called aesthetic terrorism. But her real target? My son. She'd follow him, camera in hand, whispering threats only he could hear. Each violation came with a lengthy letter explaining how our behavior was detrimental to property values and community harmony. The fine started small but kept getting bigger, and Mrs. Whitman always seemed to be watching our house, waiting for us to make another mistake. Alex became increasingly nervous about playing outside. He was afraid of accidentally breaking another rule and getting us in trouble. The confident, happy boy who had been so excited about our move was becoming withdrawn and anxious. "Why does that lady hate us?" Alex asked one evening as I was tucking him into bed. "She doesn't hate us, honey," I said, though I wasn't entirely convinced of that myself. "She just takes the neighborhood rules very seriously." "Dad says she's a bully," Alex whispered. "He says bullies pick on people because they're unhappy with themselves." Jake had indeed been growing increasingly angry about Mrs. Whitman's harassment. As a Navy SEAL, he was used to dealing with actual threats and real problems, and having someone hassle his family over trivial neighborhood rules was testing his patience. "She needs to back off," Jake said to me one night after Alex had gone to bed. I didn't spend 6 years fighting overseas just to come home and have some power-hungry HOA president terrorize my family. "Let's just try to follow the rules and stay out of her way," I suggested. "Maybe she'll lose interest and focus on someone else." But I was wrong. Mrs. Whitman's attention on our family was only getting more intense. What we didn't know was that Mrs. Whitman had become obsessed with getting our family to move out of the neighborhood. In her mind, we didn't fit the image she had for Willowbrook Gardens, and she was determined to make our lives so miserable that we would leave voluntarily. She began following Alex around the neighborhood, taking pictures of him playing and documenting his every move. She filed complaints with the school district, claiming that Alex was disruptive at the bus stop. She even called the police, reporting that Jake's military bearing and disciplined routine made her concerned about potential domestic violence. The police visit was the last straw for Jake. "Mrs. Thompson, we got a call from a neighbor saying she was concerned about possible domestic violence in your home," Officer Davis explained when he came to our door. "We're required to investigate all such reports." Domestic violence? I was shocked. Who would say such a thing? A Mrs. Patricia Whitman. She said your husband's military training and behavior patterns were concerning to her. Jake appeared behind me, still wearing his workout clothes from his morning run. "Officer, I'm Jake Thompson, retired Navy SEAL. I can assure you there is no domestic violence in this home." Officer Davis looked embarrassed. "Sir, I can see that this is probably a false report. Mrs. Whitman has called us several times about your family for various complaints. Between you and me, I think she's just trying to cause trouble." After the officer left, Jake's anger was palpable. "That woman is trying to destroy our family's reputation. She's filing false police reports and harassing our son. This ends now. What are you going to do?" I asked, worried about what Jake might be capable of when his family was threatened. Jake's voice went dead calm, the tone I'd only heard premonition. "Patricia, if you ever lay a hand on my son, your HOA rulebook won't save you." I should have realized that Mrs. Whitman wouldn't respond well to being confronted by someone she couldn't intimidate. Jake went to Mrs. Whitman's house the next evening, planning to have a calm, rational conversation about her behavior toward our family. He was dressed in casual clothes and had every intention of resolving the situation peacefully. Mrs. Whitman's house was the largest in the neighborhood, a sprawling mansion with elaborate landscaping and decorative concrete pillars flanking her front entrance. Everything about the property screamed wealth and status, which explained a lot about Mrs. Whitman's attitude toward families like ours. When Mrs. Whitman answered the door, her expression immediately became hostile. "What do you want?" she demanded. "Mrs. Whitman, I'm Jake Thompson. I think we need to talk about the situation between our families." "There's no situation," she said coldly. "There's simply a family that refuses to follow community standards and a board president who's trying to maintain property values." "Ma'am, with respect, you've been harassing my family for weeks," Jake said, keeping his voice calm and professional. The constant fines, the complaints, the false police reports, it all needs to stop. Mrs. Whitman's face flushed with anger. How dare you come to my home and threaten me? I have every right to enforce HOA rules, and I don't appreciate being intimidated by some military person. I'm not threatening you, Jake said firmly. I'm asking you to leave my family alone. We're following your rules, paying your fines, and trying to be good neighbors, but the harassment has to end. You don't belong in this neighborhood, Mrs. Whitman snapped. People like you, with your military arrogance and your problem child. You're bringing down the quality of life for everyone else. Jake's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. Mrs. Whitman, my son is a good kid who's done nothing wrong. And my military service was in defense of this country and the freedoms you enjoy every day. I don't care about your military service, she spat. All I care about is getting troublemaking families out of my neighborhood. That's when Jake realized that reasoning with Mrs. Whitman was impossible. She was too consumed with hatred and prejudice to listen to logic. Ma'am, I hope you'll reconsider your position, Jake said. But understand this, if you continue to harass my family, especially my son, there will be consequences. Mrs. Whitman's eyes narrowed. Is that a threat? It's a promise that I will protect my family using every legal means at my disposal, Jake replied. Have a good evening. As Jake walked away, Mrs. Whitman called after him. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I'll destroy your family. Her smile froze. That's when I knew she'd make sure Alex deserved it. What Jake didn't know was that Mrs. Whitman had been planning something drastic ever since our first encounter. She had convinced herself that our family was a threat to her perfect neighborhood, and she was willing to go to extreme lengths to get rid of us. Mrs. Whitman had been researching Jake's military background, and she had learned about his combat experience and specialized training. In her twisted mind, this made him dangerous, and she believed she was justified in taking preemptive action against our family. The plan she devised was both cunning and evil. Mrs. Whitman knew that Alex walked past her house every day on his way home from the school bus stop. She had observed his routine and knew exactly when he would be alone and vulnerable. She began leaving toys and candy near her front gate, knowing that a 10-year-old boy would be curious about them. Her plan was to lure Alex onto her property so she could claim he was trespassing and threatening her, justifying whatever action she decided to take. For several days, Alex had noticed the items near Mrs. Whitman's gate, but had been too scared to investigate. He remembered our warnings about staying away from her property and didn't want to get in trouble. But on that terrible Friday afternoon, Mrs. Whitman made sure Alex couldn't resist the bait. Alex never knew her gift was a death trap. It was a beautiful October day when Alex got off the school bus and started walking home. He was in a good mood because it was Friday and Jake had promised to take him to a baseball game that weekend. As Alex approached Mrs. Whitman's house, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. There was a remote-controlled car sitting just inside her front gate, and it was moving around by itself, making sounds and flashing lights. The remote-controlled car beeped, flashing red lights. Too shiny, Alex thought, but it rolled just inside her gate. Her voice slithered. Come here, boy. Alex loved remote-controlled cars, and he couldn't resist getting a closer look. He approached the gate carefully, remembering that he wasn't supposed to go onto Mrs. Whitman's property. It's okay, dear, Mrs. Whitman said, suddenly appearing from behind one of the concrete pillars that flanked her entrance. You can come look at the car. I bought it for my grandson, but he's not here today. Alex hesitated. He knew his parents had told him to stay away from Mrs. Whitman, but she was being nice to him for the first time since they'd moved to the neighborhood. I probably shouldn't, Alex said politely. My mom told me to come straight home. It will just take a minute, Mrs. Whitman insisted, her voice taking on a strange, urgent tone. Come here and I'll show you how it works. Against his better judgment, Alex stepped through the gate and approached the remote-controlled car. Mrs. Whitman was standing next to one of the large concrete pillars that decorated her entrance, and she seemed agitated and nervous. That's a cool car, Alex said, kneeling down to get a better look at it. Yes, it is, Mrs. Whitman said, and her voice had become cold and menacing. Too bad you won't get to play with it. Alex looked up at her, confused by the sudden change in her tone. That's when he saw the hatred in her eyes and realized he was in danger. I should go home now, Alex said, starting to stand up. But Mrs. Whitman was already moving. She grabbed one of the decorative concrete pillars, a heavy cylindrical piece that was about 2 feet long and 6 inches in diameter, and raised it above her head. "This is for ruining my neighborhood." She screamed and brought the pillar down with all her strength toward Alex's head. As his fingers brushed the car crack, the world exploded in white pain. Last thing he saw? Her pearls swinging above him like a pendulum. Alex tried to duck and run, but he wasn't fast enough. The concrete pillar struck him on the left side of his head with a sickening crack, and he collapsed to the ground immediately. Mrs. Whitman stood over Alex's motionless body, breathing heavily and still holding the bloody concrete pillar. For a moment, she seemed surprised by what she had done. Then, she began planning her cover story. Mrs. Whitman quickly dragged Alex's unconscious body behind the pillar where no one could see him from the street. Blood was pooling around his head, and his breathing was shallow and irregular. She went into her house and called 911, putting on an act worthy of an Oscar winner. 911, what's your emergency? Oh my God, I need help, Mrs. Whitman sobbed into the phone. A little boy fell and hit his head on my concrete pillar. He's unconscious and bleeding. Ma'am, I need you to stay calm. What's the address? 1247 Maple Lane. Please hurry, I think he's really hurt. Are you trained in first aid? Can you check if he's breathing? Yes, he's breathing, but barely. There's so much blood. I was working in my garden when I heard a crash. He must have been running and tripped. Mrs. Whitman was careful to establish her false narrative from the very beginning. In her version of events, Alex had been running recklessly and had accidentally fallen into her concrete pillar. When the paramedics arrived, they found Mrs. Whitman kneeling beside Alex, pretending to comfort him while making sure they saw the accident scene she had arranged. "What happened here?" asked the lead paramedic as his team began working on Alex. "The poor child was running down the sidewalk and tripped," Mrs. Whitman said, tears streaming down her face. "He fell right into that concrete pillar. I heard the impact from inside my house." The paramedics were too focused on saving Alex's life to question her story immediately. They could see that he had suffered a severe head injury and needed immediate medical attention. As they loaded Alex into the ambulance, Mrs. Whitman called out, "Please tell his parents how sorry I am. I wish I could have prevented this somehow." Her performance was perfect. She had successfully positioned herself as a concerned neighbor rather than the perpetrator of a vicious assault. I was at home making dinner when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer it. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Dr. Rebecca Martinez at City General Hospital. Your son Alex has been brought to our emergency room with a severe head injury." The world stopped spinning. What? What happened to Alex? "He was found unconscious with head trauma. We need you to come to the hospital immediately." I called Jake, who was at the gym, and he met me at the hospital. We ran through the emergency room doors, our hearts pounding with fear and panic. Dr. Martinez met us in the waiting area. She was a small woman with kind eyes, but her expression was grave. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, Alex has suffered a severe traumatic brain injury. He was struck in the head with significant force, causing bleeding and swelling in his brain." "How did this happen?" Jake demanded, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. According to the witness who found him, he was running on the sidewalk and fell into a concrete pillar, Dr. Martinez explained. "We've taken him into surgery to relieve the pressure on his brain." Jake and I looked at each other. Alex was a careful, coordinated kid. He had been playing sports since he was 5 years old. The idea that he would just trip and fall into a pillar seemed unlikely. "Can we see him?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "He's in surgery now. It will be several hours before we know the full extent of his injuries." As we sat in the waiting room, Mrs. Whitman arrived at the hospital. She approached us with what appeared to be genuine concern and sympathy. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I am so sorry about what happened," she said, sitting down beside us. I just feel terrible that this accident occurred on my property. You were there when it happened? Jake asked. I was inside my house, but I heard the impact. When I came outside, I found Alex unconscious. I called 911 immediately and stayed with him until the paramedics arrived. Her story sounded reasonable, and in our shock and grief, we didn't think to question it. We were just grateful that someone had been there to help Alex. Thank you for calling for help, I said through my tears. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found him. Mrs. Whitman squeezed my hand. I just wish I could have prevented it somehow. Alex is such a sweet boy. The irony of her words would become clear later, but at that moment, we were just two terrified parents grateful for any kindness from a neighbor. Alex's surgery lasted 8 hours. Dr. Martinez finally came to speak with us around 2 a.m., exhaustion evident on her face. We've been able to stop the bleeding and relieve some of the pressure on Alex's brain, she said. But I have to be honest with you, his injuries are very severe. What does that mean? Jake asked. Machines breathed for Alex. His head swollen, stitched looked wrong. Dr. Martinez's words carved into us. His left brain is pulp. If he wakes, he'll never be your boy again. My legs gave out, and Jake had to catch me before I collapsed. Our beautiful, brilliant son might never be the same. When will he wake up? I whispered. That's impossible to predict. He's in a medically induced coma right now while his brain heals. It could be days, weeks, or longer. While Whitman played grieving saint, Jake was becoming a predator. For the next 3 weeks, Jake and I maintained a constant vigil at Alex's bedside. He lay motionless, connected to machines that monitored his vital signs and kept him alive. Mrs. Whitman visited several times, always bringing flowers and expressing her sympathy. She had positioned herself as a family friend, and everyone at the hospital saw her as the kind neighbor who had saved Alex's life by finding him and calling for help. Any change today, she would ask when she visited, her voice full of what seemed like genuine concern. No change, I would reply, holding Alex's hand and willing him to wake up. What we didn't know was that Mrs. Whitman was secretly thrilled by Alex's condition. In her mind, she had successfully removed the problem from her neighborhood without anyone suspecting her involvement. But Mrs. Whitman had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated Jake's investigative instincts and his determination to protect his family. As the days passed and Alex remained unconscious, Jake began to have doubts about the official story of what had happened. His military training had taught him to question everything and to look for inconsistencies in witness accounts. Something doesn't add up, Jake told me one evening as we sat beside Alex's bed. What do you mean? Alex is too coordinated to just trip and fall into a pillar. He's been playing soccer for 5 years. He has excellent balance and spatial awareness. But Mrs. Whitman said she heard him fall. That's another thing that bothers me, Jake said. She said she heard the impact from inside her house, but she's been complaining for weeks about Alex being too loud when he plays outside. How does she hear him fall but claim his normal play is disruptive? Jake's suspicions grew stronger when he visited the accident scene. The concrete pillar where Alex had allegedly hit his head was part of a decorative set flanking Mrs. Whitman's entrance. They were heavy cylindrical pieces about 2 feet long. But when Jake examined the pillar, something didn't look right. These pillars are firmly mounted in concrete, he told me. There's no way Alex could have hit one hard enough to cause his injuries just by falling. The physics don't work. Jake's Navy SEAL training included expertise in ballistics, impact analysis, and forensic investigation. He knew how much force it would take to cause the kind of brain injury Alex had suffered. And a simple fall wouldn't generate that kind of impact. What are you saying? I asked, though part of me was beginning to understand. I'm saying Alex didn't fall, Jake said grimly. Someone hit him with something heavy, and they hit him hard enough to crack his skull. The realization that our son had been attacked rather than accidentally injured changed everything. Jake began conducting his own investigation, using skills he had learned during years of special operations missions. Jake started by studying the accident scene more carefully. He measured distances, analyzed blood spatter patterns, and examined every inch of Mrs. Whitman's property. What he found confirmed his suspicions. Jake found it buried under roses, the missing pillar crusted with blood and Alex's hair. A full wooden splatter like this, he hissed, tracing arterial spray up the wall. She swung this like a bat. The blood evidence showed that Alex had been struck while he was standing near the gate, not running toward the pillar. The pattern of blood spatter indicated that he had been hit by an object moving downward at high velocity, exactly what would happen if someone had raised a concrete pillar above their head and brought it down with force. Jake also discovered that one of the decorative pillars was missing from its mounting bracket. When he asked Mrs. Whitman about it, she claimed it had been damaged in a recent storm and that she had disposed of it. "Where did you dispose of it?" Jake asked. "I had it hauled away with some other debris," Mrs. Whitman replied. But Jake noticed that she avoided making eye contact when she spoke. Jake's military instincts told him that Mrs. Whitman was lying, but he needed more evidence before he could prove it. He began interviewing neighbors, asking if anyone had seen or heard anything unusual on the day Alex was injured. Most people hadn't noticed anything, but Mrs. Johnson, who lived 2 houses down, provided a crucial piece of information. "I did see something odd," Mrs. Johnson told Jake. "About an hour before the ambulance arrived, I saw Mrs. Whitman carrying something heavy toward her backyard. She looked agitated and kept looking around like she didn't want to be seen." Jake asked if he could search Mrs. Whitman's backyard, but she refused, claiming it would be an invasion of her privacy. That's when Jake decided to use his special operations training to conduct his own reconnaissance mission. Late one night, while Mrs. Whitman was away visiting relatives, Jake conducted a covert search of her property. Using techniques he had learned in the Navy SEALs, he was able to access her backyard without being detected. What he found there made his blood run cold. Buried under a pile of leaves and garden debris was the missing concrete pillar. It was cracked and stained with what appeared to be blood and hair. Jake carefully documented the evidence with photos and GPS coordinates, then left everything exactly as he had found it. But Jake's most important discovery came when he found the remote-controlled car that Mrs. Whitman had used to lure Alex onto her property. It was hidden in her garage, and it still had Alex's fingerprints on it. The evidence was now overwhelming. Mrs. Whitman had deliberately lured Alex onto her property, attacked him with a concrete pillar, and then staged the scene to make it look like an accident. Jake contacted his former commanding officer, who had connections with federal law enforcement agencies. Within 24 hours, FBI agents were examining the evidence Jake had collected. "This is definitely a premeditated assault," FBI Special Agent Rachel Torres told Jake. "The evidence you've gathered is strong enough to support charges of attempted murder." "What's our next step?" Jake asked. "We're going to set up surveillance on Mrs. Whitman and gather additional evidence. We want to make sure our case is airtight before we make an arrest." For the next week, federal agents monitored Mrs. Whitman's activities while Jake continued his bedside vigil with Alex. Mrs. Whitman had no idea that her carefully constructed lie was unraveling. Mrs. Whitman was arrested on a Tuesday morning while she was tending to her garden. FBI agents and local police surrounded her house as she was watering her flowers, the same flowers she had been pretending to tend when she called 911 after attacking Alex. "Patricia Whitman, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Alex Thompson," Agent Torres announced as handcuffs were placed on Mrs. Whitman's wrists. "This is ridiculous," Mrs. Whitman protested. "That boy fell and hurt himself. I was the one who helped him." "Ma'am, we have evidence that you lured Alex onto your property and struck him with a concrete pillar," Agent Torres replied. "You have the right to remain silent." As Mrs. Whitman was led away in handcuffs, neighbors gathered to watch in shock. The woman they had respected and feared as their HOA president was being arrested for trying to murder a 10-year-old child. The news spread quickly through the neighborhood and then to the local media. "HOA president arrested for attempted murder of child" became the headline that dominated local news for weeks. Jake felt a grim satisfaction watching Mrs. Whitman's arrest, but his focus remained on Alex, who was still fighting for his life in the hospital. 2 days after Mrs. Whitman's arrest, Alex finally opened his eyes. Jake and I were sitting beside his bed when we saw his eyelids flutter. "Alex, can you hear me, buddy?" Jake said softly, taking his son's hand. Alex's eyes opened slowly, and he looked around the room with confusion. When he tried to speak, only a whisper came out. "Dad, what happened to me?" "You were hurt, son." "But you're safe now," Jake said, tears streaming down his face. "The person who hurt you can't hurt you anymore." Dr. Martinez came to examine Alex and assess his condition. The news was both encouraging and sobering. "Alex is conscious and responsive, which is excellent," she explained. "However, his speech is slurred, and there appears to be some weakness on his right side. These are likely permanent effects of the brain injury." "Will he get better?" I asked. "Children's brains are remarkably adaptable," Dr. Martinez said. "With intensive rehabilitation therapy, Alex may be able to regain some of the functions he's lost, but it will be a long process, and he'll never be exactly the same as he was before. Alex would need years of physical therapy, speech therapy, and cognitive rehabilitation." The bright, athletic boy who had been so excited about starting 5th grade would now face challenges that most children never have to confront. But he was alive and he was fighting. That was more than we had dared hope for during those dark weeks when he was unconscious. Mrs. Whitman's trial began 6 months after Alex's injury. The case had attracted national attention, and the courtroom was packed with reporters, neighbors, and advocates for children's rights. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michael Chin, presented a compelling case that demonstrated Mrs. Whitman's escalating harassment of our family and her premeditated plan to attack Alex. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," D.A. Chin said in his opening statement, "Patricia Whitman didn't just snap one day and hurt a child. She methodically planned and executed an attack on a 10-year-old boy because she didn't want his family in her neighborhood. The evidence was overwhelming. The buried concrete pillar, the remote-controlled car, the blood evidence, and Mrs. Whitman's own inconsistent statements all pointed to her guilt. Jake testified about his investigation and the evidence he had uncovered. His calm, professional demeanor, and military credibility made him a powerful witness. "I knew from the beginning that Alex's injuries weren't caused by a simple fall," Jake testified. "The physical evidence at the scene was inconsistent with Mrs. Whitman's story. I testified about Mrs. Whitman's harassment of our family and Alex's condition before and after the attack. Alex was a healthy, happy child before Mrs. Whitman attacked him," I told the jury. "Now he struggles with basic functions like walking and speaking. She stole his childhood and his future." The most emotional moment came when Alex himself testified. At 11 years old, with his speech still impaired from the brain injury, he bravely told the jury what he remembered about the attack. Alex gripped the stand, right hand trembling. "SH," she said. "L, look at the C-car." He locked eyes with Whitman. Then, smash. His scar pulsed crimson. The jury wept. Mrs. Whitman's defense team tried to argue that the attack had been a moment of temporary insanity, but the evidence of premeditation was too strong. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours before returning with their verdict: guilty of attempted murder in the 1st degree. Mrs. Whitman was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Alex's recovery was slow and difficult, but he approached it with the same determination that had made him such a good athlete before his injury. He worked with physical therapists to regain his motor skills, speech therapists to improve his communication, and cognitive specialists to help him relearn basic academic skills. Jake became Alex's biggest advocate and supporter during this process. His military discipline and never-give-up attitude helped motivate Alex during the most frustrating parts of his rehabilitation. "Remember, buddy, SEALs never quit," Jake would tell Alex when the therapy sessions became overwhelming. "You're tougher than any challenge they can give you." Slowly, Alex began to improve. His speech became clearer, his walking became steadier, and his cognitive function started to return. He would never be exactly the same as he had been before the attack, but he was proving that the human spirit could overcome incredible obstacles. The neighborhood rallied around our family during Alex's recovery. The same neighbors who had been afraid to stand up to Mrs. Whitman's tyranny now organized fundraisers for Alex's medical expenses and provided emotional support for our family. "We should have spoken up sooner," Mrs. Johnson told me. We all knew Patricia was a bully, but we never imagined she was capable of something like this. The new HOA board, elected after Mrs. Whitman's arrest, implemented policies focused on community support rather than arbitrary rule enforcement. They renamed the neighborhood park Alex Thompson Memorial Park in honor of his courage and recovery. While the criminal case had resulted in Mrs. Whitman's conviction, Jake and I also pursued a civil lawsuit to help cover Alex's massive medical expenses and to hold Mrs. Whitman financially accountable for her actions. The civil trial revealed even more disturbing details about Mrs. Whitman's mental state and her obsession with controlling the neighborhood. Expert witnesses testified that she had shown clear signs of antisocial personality disorder and had escalated her aggressive behavior over several years. Mrs. Whitman viewed Alex and his family as threats to her vision of neighborhood perfection, testified Dr. Sarah Williams, a forensic psychologist. She dehumanized them to the point where she felt justified in using violence to remove what she saw as a problem. The jury awarded our family $5 million in damages, which would help cover Alex's ongoing medical needs and provide some financial security for his future. Mrs. Whitman's assets, including her expensive house and investments, were seized to pay the judgment. The woman who had once ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist was left with nothing but a prison cell and the knowledge that her hatred had destroyed not only Alex's life, but her own as well. As Alex continued to recover and our family began to heal from the trauma, Jake and I decided to use our experience to help other families facing similar challenges. We established the Alex Thompson Foundation, which provided support for families of children who had suffered traumatic brain injuries due to violence or negligence. The foundation offered financial assistance, legal resources, and emotional support during the difficult recovery process. Jake used his military connections to develop relationships with medical professionals and rehabilitation specialists who could provide the best possible care for brain injury victims. No family should have to fight this battle alone, Jake said during the foundation's launch event. When someone hurts your child, you meet people who understand what you're going through and who know how to help. I focused on supporting the families emotionally, helping them navigate the complex feelings of anger, grief, and hope that come with having a child who has suffered a traumatic brain injury. The person your child was before the injury is gone, I would tell families. But that doesn't mean the person they're becoming is any less valuable or loved. It's just a different journey than the one you had planned. As Alex entered his teenage years, he had defied many of the doctor's initial predictions about his recovery. While he still struggled with some motor skills and had to work harder than other kids in school, he had developed into a remarkable young man with a deep sense of empathy and determination. At age 14, Alex began speaking at conferences about traumatic brain injury recovery and bullying prevention. His speech was still slower than normal, but his message was powerful and clear. "The woman who hurt me thought I was just a problem to be solved," Alex told audiences. "But I'm a person with feelings, dreams, and the right to exist. What happened to me was wrong, but it taught me that I'm stronger than I ever knew." Alex had also become an advocate for other children with disabilities, using his experience to help them feel less alone in their struggles. "When I first woke up in the hospital, I thought my life was over," Alex shared during one speech. "I couldn't walk properly, I couldn't talk clearly, and I felt like I wasn't the same person anymore. But I learned that being different doesn't mean being less valuable." His courage and resilience inspired everyone who met him, but perhaps no one was more proud than Jake. "That kid has more courage than most of the soldiers I served with," Jake would tell people. "He faces challenges every day that would break most adults, and he does it with a smile." While Alex was thriving and our family was healing, Mrs. Whitman was discovering that prison life was very different from the comfortable, controlling existence she had enjoyed as HOA president. In prison, Mrs. Whitman's wealth and social status meant nothing. Her crime, attacking a child, made her a target for other inmates who had their own children and couldn't tolerate violence against kids. "She keeps to herself mostly," a prison guard told a journalist who was writing about the case. "The other inmates don't want anything to do with someone who hurt a little boy. She's learned to stay quiet and out of the way." Mrs. Whitman had been required to attend anger management classes and psychological counseling, but according to reports, she showed little remorse for her actions and continued to blame our family for ruining her life. She still doesn't understand that what she did was wrong, her court-appointed psychiatrist noted in a report. In her mind, she was justified in attacking Alex because his family didn't meet her standards for the neighborhood. This continued lack of remorse only reinforced our belief that Mrs. Whitman was exactly where she belonged, locked away where she couldn't hurt any more children. 5 years after the attack, Alex agreed to participate in a documentary about his case and its impact on disability awareness and HOA reform. The film, titled Concrete Courage, the Alex Thompson story, premiered at film festivals around the country. The documentary included interviews with Alex, our family, neighbors, medical professionals, and legal experts who explained the broader implications of the case. This wasn't just one disturbed woman attacking one child, explained civil rights attorney David Rodriguez in the film. This was the result of a system that gave unchecked power to someone who used it to terrorize families she didn't think belonged in her community. The film's most powerful moments came from Alex himself, who had grown into an articulate and thoughtful teenager despite his ongoing challenges. "I forgive Mrs. Whitman for what she did to me," Alex said in the documentary. "Not because she deserves forgiveness, but because carrying hatred in my heart would hurt me more than it would hurt her. I choose to focus on helping other kids instead of staying angry about the past." The documentary won several awards and was broadcast on national television, bringing Alex's story to millions of viewers and inspiring new conversations about disability rights and community inclusion. Alex's case had far-reaching legal and social consequences beyond our family. The attack sparked new legislation designed to prevent HI abuse and protect vulnerable community members. The Alex Thompson Community Protection Act was passed in multiple states, creating oversight mechanisms for HOA boards and establishing criminal penalties for officials who abuse their authority to harm residents. The law also required HOA boards to undergo training in disability awareness and conflict resolution, and it created a reporting system for residents to file complaints about board member misconduct. Alex's case showed us how dangerous it can be when we give unchecked power to people who lack empathy and compassion, said State Senator Maria Gonzalez, who sponsored the legislation. This law helps ensure that what happened to Alex can never happen to another child. Jake testified before state legislatures about the need for HOA reform, using his military background and investigative experience to explain how Mrs. Whitman had been able to escalate her harassment into attempted murder. "Systems without accountability inevitably lead to abuse," Jake told lawmakers. "We need laws that protect families from people who would use community positions to terrorize their neighbors." As Alex approached his 18th birthday, he had not only recovered far beyond the doctor's initial expectations, but had also discovered his own sense of purpose and mission. He had been accepted to several colleges and planned to study criminal justice and psychology with the goal of becoming a victim's advocate for children who had suffered violence. "I want to help other kids who have been through what I went through," Alex explained. "I understand what it feels like to be hurt and scared and to wonder if you'll ever be normal again. I want to be the person who tells them that it gets better." Alex had also become a skilled artist, using drawing and painting as therapy to express emotions that were difficult to put into words. His artwork had been displayed in galleries, and the proceeds from sales continued to support the foundation's work. "Art helps me show people what it feels like to survive something terrible," Alex said. "When I paint, I can express hope and healing in ways that words can't capture." Jake and I were incredibly proud of the young man Alex had become. The attack that was meant to destroy him had instead revealed his incredible strength and compassion. "That woman tried to break our son," I said during a television interview. "Instead, she forged him into someone stronger than she could ever imagine." 10 years after Mrs. Whitman's attack, Alex had graduated from college with honors and was working as a victim's advocate at a children's hospital. His own experience with trauma and recovery made him uniquely qualified to help other families navigate similar challenges. The Alex Thompson Foundation had helped hundreds of families and had become a nationally recognized resource for traumatic brain injury support. Jake had retired from his consulting work to run the foundation full-time, and I had become a certified trauma counselor specializing in families of assault victims. Our family had been forever changed by Mrs. Whitman's violence, but we had chosen to let that change make us stronger and more compassionate rather than bitter and fearful. Alex had also started a relationship with Sarah, a young woman he had met through his advocacy work. Sarah was a physical therapist who worked with brain injury patients, and she understood and appreciated Alex's unique perspective and experiences. Sarah sees me as a whole person, not just someone who is hurt, Alex told us. She loves me for who I am now, not who I might have been if the attack hadn't happened. Watching Alex find love and happiness despite everything he had been through was perhaps the greatest victory our family could have asked for. After serving 15 years of her 25-year sentence, Mrs. Whitman died in prison from complications related to diabetes and heart disease. She was 78 years old and had never expressed genuine remorse for attacking Alex. The prison chaplain who had worked with Mrs. Whitman during her final years told us that she remained convinced that she had been the victim in the situation. Even at the end, she believed that your family had somehow wronged her, the chaplain said. She couldn't understand that a child's right to exist was more important than her desire for neighborhood control. When we told Alex about Mrs. Whitman's death, his response showed the remarkable maturity and wisdom he had developed over the years. "I'm not glad she's dead, but I'm not sad either," Alex said. "She chose to live with hatred in her heart, and that probably made her more miserable than any punishment we could have given her. I choose to live with love and hope instead." Mrs. Whitman's death marked the end of a chapter in our family story, but it wasn't the end of Alex's mission to help other children and families affected by violence. As I write this, 15 years have passed since Mrs. Whitman struck my 10-year-old son with a concrete pillar and nearly killed him. Alex is now 25 years old, married to Sarah, and they are expecting their first child. Alex has overcome challenges that would have defeated many people, and he has used his experience to help thousands of other children and families. He has become a nationally recognized advocate for traumatic brain injury awareness and has testified before Congress about the need for better support services for violence victims. The Alex Thompson Foundation has expanded into a network of support centers across the country, providing comprehensive services for families dealing with childhood trauma and brain injury. Jake has written a book about investigating his son's attack and the importance of never giving up on seeking justice for your family. The book has become a resource for other parents facing similar situations. I have completed my doctorate in trauma counseling and now train other professionals who work with assault victims and their families. Mrs. Whitman thought she could destroy our family by attacking our son. Instead, she unleashed a force for good that has touched thousands of lives and made the world a safer place for vulnerable children. Alex's first child will grow up in a world where laws protect children from abusive authority figures, where communities support rather than exclude different families, and where one person's courage to survive and thrive can inspire countless others. Patricia Whitman died alone in prison, still blaming us for ruining her perfect neighborhood. But my grandson plays an Alex Thompson Memorial Park now right where she tried to end him. The concrete pillar? We melted it into a plaque. "Here lies a bully. Choose kindness." The woman who tried to murder my son with a concrete pillar believed that hatred and violence were more powerful than love and justice. She was wrong. Alex's story proves that no matter how dark the attack, no matter how severe the injury, the human spirit can not only survive, but can transform suffering into service and pain into purpose. Mrs. Whitman's legacy is a prison cell and a gravestone. Alex's legacy is a movement that protects children and gives hope to families in their darkest hours. That is the difference between choosing hatred and choosing love. That is the power of a father's determination, a family's resilience, and a child's incredible courage to turn tragedy into triumph. The boy who was supposed to die from a blow to the head grew up to use his brain to save other children. And that perhaps is the most perfect justice of all.